In an ironic move, the US government has announced a massive aid to any NGO in India that promotes religious freedom. The US has said that it wants to increase societal tolerance and reduce religiously motivated violence. So is this an attempt by the Trump administration to keep India in check, the Indian government in check? Very recently, when the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee was hearing the nomination of Kenneth Juster, who is now going to be the next US envoy to India, they had raised this entire issue of the shrinking space for civil society in India. So is this something that the new US ambassador is going to be coming with? Is this the brief that the next US ambassador will carry? But this is something that happened a couple of hours ago. We saw the US government announcing a grant of nearly $500,000 to any NGO in India that promotes religious freedom. The US has said it wants to increase societal tolerance and religiously motivated violence needs to go down. Let me get you more details on this. This is a story that has come in from the United States. The goal of the program is to increase societal tolerance and improve civilian security to reduce religiously motivated violence and discrimination. And the funds will support activities that work towards that direction. That is what a State Department official has said. The State Department's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labour, in a notice, has said that it seeks to reduce religiously motivated violence and discrimination in India, and therefore this grant program is now being introduced. They have also said that we do not disclose implementers of programs when asked about who the recipients would be, but the recipients would be announced later after a screening of successful applicants. So the procedure is now in place. If there is any NGO in India or abroad who wants to work for societal tolerance and to reduce religious intolerance in India, they will be getting aid from the United States State Department. The State Department wants the organizations applying for the grant to come up with proposals to develop and implement early warning systems to mitigate large-scale violence and implement conflict mitigation programs between minority and majority groups. That's what a spokesperson for the US State Department has said. My deputy news editor, Shravan Sen, he's joining us with more perspective on this story. Shravan, do we see this as an attempt by the Trump administration to keep India in check? On one hand, yes, we have those very strong Indo-US ties when it comes to terror, to defense, those strategic ties as well. But there are concerns over the economy and over religious intolerance, as the United States is now seeing.
India also has to say that they are monitoring this entire issue, because given the fact that this is something that even the US needs to look into. But here you have this entire NGO competition. This is what we are given to understand, and they have already announced a reward. At the same time, they're calling this entire funding opportunity for all these NGOs. They've given the date as November 7th of November when this entire notice was actually issued. Now look at the kind of the conditions that they have put in. They are saying that what the NGOs can essentially do, they can implement early warning systems to bring down large-scale violence. Point number one. Point number two is counter hateful public messages. Third point is educate civil society and journalists on religious freedom. Fourth point is report religious freedom violations to authorities. Fifth is educate law enforcement on human rights standards. Sixth, engage law enforcement to better protect rights of religious minorities. Essentially, if you look at all these pointers, it only points towards one thing, that it is perhaps the US administration now really getting into the preaching mode. And as far as India is concerned, they haven't really taken this lightly. We've already looked into the Ministry of Home Affairs saying that they will certainly look into this. And this is perhaps not the first attempt that has been made by the US administration. There have been such sort of funding in the past, which has obviously come under the scanner, not taken very lightly by the Indian government.
Right. There was a recent hearing at the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee in the United States, Shravan, where Bob Corker, who's the head of that committee, had raised this question about shrinking space for the civil society and NGOs and the rise of Hindu nationalism. So, do you think that this is now going to be a concern for the next US envoy to India? And this will be an issue that US will continue raising with India from time to time?
Well, as far as the ministry here is concerned, they've already made this point very clear that this is not the first time that this has happened. But at the same time, they've raised this issue at platforms where they need to. And they've made it very clear that this is not something that they would have really expected from a country which is considered to be friendly, and more importantly, they are not in any position to preach. Now, this is exactly what some of our sources within the Ministry of Home Affairs have also been saying, and they are at this stage saying that they are monitoring each and every development on this front. Now, what does it really mean? What are they really going to do? At what level would they really take up this entire matter? That's still not very clear. But with this entire document now surfacing, and the fact that this is not the first time that this has happened, we'll still have to wait and see as to how the Ministry of Home Affairs really responds, whether they're going to take it up with the Ministry of External Affairs and see what is exactly the motive behind this sort of a funding. Whether it is only limited to India or other countries is also something that would be a matter of concern for the Indian authorities.
All right, Shravan. For the moment, the Ministry of External Affairs saying that they will continue to monitor it, and any such NGO which is getting US aid will have to conform to legal standards in India. Thanks, Shravan, for joining us and putting that story in perspective. Yes,